Hey everybody, welcome to the videos where we're going over my first thoughts for week 4 of the NFL season over on Draftkings. But before we continue, as always, if you guys could just leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, you might as well hit that subscribe button. I'm here all season long trying to help you guys become better NFL DFS players, and I cover other sports as well. So if you're going to come back to the channel each and every single day, or each and every single week, you might as well hit that subscribe button and turn that notification bell so you don't miss out whenever I post new videos. And if you don't follow me on social media, my handle's in the bottom left-hand corner, other way, of your screen. And if you want to support my content over on Patreon, always much appreciated. But please wait until the first of the month because I don't want you guys to get double charged. As I'm recording this, it is September 29th, and Patreon will charge you on the day you sign up in the first of the month. So if you're interested in my content, you get access into the entire NFL DFS data sheet. It has pretty much every single statistic you want heading into the weekend. I preview it for you guys every first thoughts and final look video, first look video and my final thoughts video. I think I had that backwards in the intro, but all the numbers you need here: Vegas, pace of play, matchups, the advanced statistics, all the numbers you want. Everything's color coded nice and neat, so you know what's good, what's bad, and the cheat sheet with all my notes as well. And you can hop into the Discord chat and bug me all day if you want to. So if you're interested, links down below for that. But again, just wait until the first of the month, and I think that's pretty much it for the plugging. So without further ado, I say we can get into today's video. So we'll start with the quarterback position, and this is going to be a pretty exciting slate. There's a ton of good spots here. As you can see, for the Vegas over-unders here, for all these quarterbacks I have listed, there is not a total below 52 points. That is extremely, extremely exciting. 54-point over-under for the Seahawks games, 52.5 for the Buffalo Bills versus the Raiders, 55 for the Browns-Cowboys game, 52 for the Cardinals and the Panthers, and 54.5 for the Vikings and the Houston Texans. So should be a pretty exciting week here. There's a lot of ways we can go at quarterback, and there's a lot of ways we can go at other positions as well. So it's going to be hard just picking one lineup if that's kind of your thing, if you only play one lineup per week, because there's a lot of people I'm going to want to play this weekend. But we'll start up top with my QB1 on the slate. Yes, Lamar Jackson does exist, but I do like Russell Wilson a bit more. And I'm not just being completely recency biased here with how bad Lamar Jackson was last night, but if I can save a couple of bucks for guys that have similar upside like Wilson, Allen, Prescott, Kyler Murray, etc., I'll take the savings with them. And also the Ravens are, I believe, 13.5-point favorites, so that game could get out of hand, and we could end up seeing RG3 in the fourth quarter. So I just don't really think it's worth the risk of paying $8,100 for him. But let's start up here, up top, with Russell Wilson. He comes in at $7,800, pretty expensive, but the way he's been playing this season, I think that's totally justified. He could honestly be the most expensive quarterback on the slate over Lamar Jackson. He has just been that good. But the Seahawks are on the road here. Only a 6.5-point spread, which I'm glad it's not double digits because I would worry about the Seahawks letting off the gas, but their defense has not been that great this season. If Ryan Fitzpatrick can have a good game here and keep this game close, Russell Wilson could once again throw for 300-plus yards and nearly 5 touchdowns, which is pretty much what he's averaging so far this season if you're looking at his numbers. Over 300 yards passing per game, nearly 5 touchdowns per game, which is insane. You can't expect that pace to keep up, but the way he's playing right now, it would not surprise me if he does it once again. 9 yards per attempt, 76% completion percentage. He's got 2 really good wide receivers in DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett to throw the ball to. He's got 139 QBR rating so far to start the season. And the matchup versus Miami is pretty good. They're 25th DVA versus the pass, allowing nearly 25 DraftKings points per game to quarterbacks. So he's pretty pricey, but Russell Wilson's just been so good this year, and the team total of 30.25. I mean, I think most of that's going to come from Russell Wilson. So definitely like him quite a bit. And then dropping down to Josh Allen at 7,300. The guy just keeps having incredible games, and he's kind of been like Russell Wilson, where he just keeps having really, really strong fantasy performances. I just pulled up his game log really quick, just for reference. He's met 33.2 points, 37.5 points, and 36.2 points, and he's had at least 3 touchdowns in every game so far. He had 5 last week, he had 4 the week before, and he's also getting the job done on the ground as well. Not really getting a whole bunch in the yardage department, but week 1 he did have 14 rushing attempts for 57 rushing yards and 1 rushing touchdown. He's got 2 rushing touchdowns on the season, so you get the rushing upside as well. This is a pretty soft matchup versus the not the Oakland Raiders, the Las Vegas Raiders. They've struggled defensively this year. 18th DVA versus the pass, which is a little bit better than last season, and only 16.9 DraftKings points per game to quarterbacks and 247 passing yards per game, but this is still a decently soft matchup here. He's got Stephon Diggs to throw the ball to, and Josh Allen. He's a dual threat quarterback, which makes him playable every single week because of that high floor. And a 52.5 point over under here, and there's a 27.75 implied team total for the Buffalo Bills. So Josh Allen's certainly on my radar, especially for how well he's been playing this season. Dak Prescott, 7,200 going against the Cleveland Browns in Dallas. I'm a Browns fan, but I was surprised that they were only 4.5-point dogs on the road here. I think they're giving them quite the respect, and Dallas's defense obviously has not been that great. So this potentially could be a pretty back and forth battle. And if Baker Mayfield looks sharp and the run game's working for the Browns, and if this game stays close, I mean, Dak Prescott can have another huge game here, and he's been excellent for DFS purposes so far this year. And like I said, a 55-point over-under, a 29.75 implied team total here for the Cowboys. A lot of points should be scored, and the Cowboys are also playing at the fastest pace of play in this season. Although this does not include Week 3 numbers yet, but for the first 2 weeks, they were under 20 seconds per play, which was the fastest in the league. Once the Week 3 numbers come in, they're still going to be pretty fast. And he's at nearly 400 passing yards per game this year, with nearly 50 passing attempts per game as well. So a lot of volume there. He also likes to run the ball a bit, and he does like stealing Zeke's touchdowns to the goal line. We saw that versus the Falcons in Week 2. So Dak Prescott, it's a pretty good matchup here versus the Browns. They are 10th DVA versus the pass, but they're allowing 23.2 Draftkings points per game to quarterbacks, nearly 3 passing touchdowns per game, and close to 300 passing yards per game as well. He's also got some good options in Michael Gallup, Amari Cooper, CeeDee Lamb, even Dalton Schultz, and Zeke Elliott out of the backfield. So this Cowboys offense should be able to score quite a few points in this game. So I am certainly a fan of Dak Prescott this week. Kyler Murray, I'm a big Kyler Murray fan. I love watching him play. $7,000, he gets a really good matchup here versus the Carolina Panthers, who just have one of the worst defenses in the league. And again, a 52-point over-under. All these totals are extremely high. 27.75 applied team total for the Cardinals, and they're another team that likes to play pretty fast as well. The great thing about Kyler Murray is that he has that rushing upside, and actually all four of the quarterbacks we already talked about do have rushing upside. Russell Wilson, he's mobile. Josh Allen's very mobile. Dak Prescott can run the ball as well. And Kyler Murray, he's the best running quarterback of the bunch that we are talking about so far. But, sorry, I think the video glitched out really quick. But I was talking about Kyler Murray's rushing upside, and if we look at how he's done on the ground this season, nearly 9 rushing attempts per game, 62 rushing yards per game, over a rushing touchdown per game. He's just been racking up rushing touchdowns each and every single week. Now, he is struggling with interceptions a bit. I think he's got 5 on the season. He's gotten 1.67 per game so far, and only 1.3 passing touchdowns per game. But they like to throw the ball quite a bit, nearly 40 passing attempts per game. He's got DeAndre Hopkins to throw the ball to, Andy Isabella, Christian Kirk potentially. And this matchup's just absolutely pristine. He offers you that high floor with the rushing upside. The Panthers are 28 DVA versus the pass this season, only allowing 14.6 DraftKings points per game to quarterbacks, but Kyler Murray should be fine here. This is a pretty good offense. They play at a fast pace, and look, he's got great weapons to throw the ball to, and I love that rushing upside. So Kyler Murray, definitely one of my favorite quarterbacks on the slate. And Deshaun Watson at 6,600. So this is a good matchup versus Minnesota. They've been a pretty bad defense to start the season. And I know Deshaun Watson hasn't exactly been amazing this season for DFS. We're at 21 points, 15 and 18, but this spot's really good. I like the pairing of him and Will Fuller this weekend. I also have some interest in David Johnson as well, but they have a team total of 29, 54.5 point over under. They're playing at home. Again, Deshaun Watson hasn't exactly been anything too crazy. The Vikings are allowing 300 passing yards per game to quarterbacks as well. Obviously, the quarterbacks, 20.7 DraftKings points per game allowed as well. 1.67 passing touchdowns. They are 13 DVA versus the pass, but this is a beatable matchup here for Deshaun Watson. I like the price tag. He's got that rushing upside as well. So Deshaun Watson at 6,600. He's certainly in play for me as of right now. Now, if you need to save some money, which there's some really good spend-up options at running back and wide receiver this week, so if you want to go with a cheaper quarterback, I totally understand that. And I kind of like Baker Mayfield and Ryan Fitzpatrick quite a bit here. Baker Mayfield, this is mainly just wanting to get exposure to this 55-point over-under game, which should have a lot of points scored here, and the Browns are also 4.5-point road dogs, so they might have to throw the ball a little bit more than they'd like to. This is a run-first team. You have Kareem Hunt, and you got Nick Chubb. They want to pound the rock on those guys, but Dallas has been very beatable through the air this season. And Baker's got some good options to get the ball to. You got Austin Hooper down the middle. You got Odell Beckham Jr. on the outside, Jarvis Landry in the slot, and even Kareem Hunt out of the backfield. Now, Baker's not someone you can really trust, and trust me, guys, I'm a Browns fan. I'm not being biased here. He's a very up-and-down quarterback. When they can run the ball well, and he typically plays pretty well off of play action, but I mean, there's some times he just misses some guys where he should not be missing those passes, and he has only thrown the ball 28 times per game so far. Like I said, this is a run first team. He's only getting 6.6 yards per attempt and only 188 passing yards per game as well. But this should be a pass-heavy script for Cleveland if Dallas does what they should. And look, the Browns have a pretty beatable defense, and I don't know if they're really going to be able to stop Zeke. I know they have a good defensive line, but I mean, stopping Zeke is going to be a tough task, and even if they stop Zeke, I mean, Dak can obviously go down the field with Amari Cooper, Gallup, and CeeDee Lamb. So I'm expecting the Browns to have to throw the ball quite a bit here. I think we'll get Baker over 30 pass attempts, and look, the matchup's fine. They're allowing 26.6 DraftKings points per game to quarterbacks, 3 passing touchdowns per game, nearly 300 passing yards per game, and they're 24th DVA versus the pass. At only 5,800, I don't mind Baker, and you can easily pair him up with Odell, who's also, I believe, same price at 5,800. So not a bad little stack there, and you could run that back with someone like Zeke Elliott. If you think the Cowboys are going to be winning, that would make sense because then the Browns have to throw the ball quite a bit, so that could be a decent pairing. Or you could just go all wide receivers with like a CeeDee Lamb, Amari Cooper, or a Michael Gallup, or even a Schultz. And then really scraping the bottom of the barrel here, we have Ryan Fitzpatrick at a very cheap 5,400, but I actually like this play quite a bit. Seattle has not been good at all versus the pass this season. And can we scroll to the matchup? I had to double check this to make sure I had this lined up right, and I do. They're giving up 440 passing yards per game so far to quarterbacks, over 33 DraftKings points per game to the position as well, and they're 29th DVA versus the pass. This is a great matchup for Ryan Fitzpatrick. They should be throwing the ball quite a bit. Ryan Fitzpatrick's not afraid to chuck the ball around down the field. 54-point over-under, the 6.5-point underdogs here at home, and this is a beatable matchup. And Fitzpatrick, thrown the ball only 32 times per game so far, 226 passing yards, but I expect them to be trailing here, and he should be chucking the ball to Devontae Parker, Preston Williams, and some other guys as well. So they're only 5,400. I don't hate using Fitzpatrick. If you want to go Fitzpatrick, Devontae Parker, run that back with DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, I think that's a fine stack as well. And that's pretty much all I want to talk about for the quarterback. So move on to the running back position. And up top here we have Alvin Kamara at $8,000. And he's coming off an absolute massive performance on Sunday night versus the Packers. And I mean, when you roster Alvin Kamara, the past couple of games, it's been like getting a wide receiver 1 and an RB1. Now, Michael Thomas is trying to return this week. We'll see if that's the case. But even if he does return, we'll see if he's going to be a bit gimpy or not, see if he's limited. But that's something we'll have to monitor through the week. But even if Michael Thomas plays, we can still use Alvin Kamara. We have a big sample size of Kamara still being just fine with Michael Thomas playing. But if Michael Thomas happens to miss, I mean, it's going to be hard not to roster Alvin Kamara. I mean, the numbers he's getting in the passing game right now are insane. And if we're looking at through the first 3 games, his work in the passing game, he's getting 10 targets per game, 95 receiving yards per game, 9 catches per game, a receiving touchdown per game, a 31% target share, and a 46% weighted opportunity share. Those are absolutely insane numbers. On the ground, only 10 rushing attempts per game and 51 rushing yards, but I mean, he's just doing so much damage through the air, and even if Michael Thomas returns, they're not going to stop getting the ball through the air. And even when Michael Thomas does play, they still target Alvin Kamara quite a bit. Drew Brees loves dumping it off to Kamara. Good things happen when he gets the ball. He had that amazing run catch on Sunday night. I think it went for like 50-some yards, and it was just incredible. I love watching Alvin Kamara play football. He's one of my favorite running backs to watch. I think he's, arguably the most talented running back. His balance and agility are just insane. But this is also a tremendous spot versus the Lions. He should be able to smash here. They have a 29-point implied team total, 54-point over-under. This is another game that's got a super high over-under, and they're also 4-point favorites. So this game stays pretty close. Kamara should have a monster game here. I love what he's doing in the passing game. The Detroit Lions are 29th DVA versus the run, allowing nearly 30 DraftKings points per game to running backs, 146 rushing yards per game. And they have a huge offensive line versus defensive line advantage this week, according to PFF. So Kamara pretty much makes a case for the RB1 on this slate, either him or Ezekiel Elliott, in my opinion. Can't go wrong with either, and if you can play both, go for it. But I realize they're a little expensive, so that might not be the easiest thing to do, especially if you're spending up for quarterback. But if you spend down for someone like Ryan Fitzpatrick or even Baker Mayfield, you should be able to afford Kamara and Zeke Elliott, but both are excellent plays here, and you're kind of just splitting hairs up top. But I love what Kamara can do in the receiving game. But Zeke here at 7,800, we know he's going to get the volume. And look, they have a team total of nearly 30 on this slate. They're 4.5-point favorites at home, a 55-point over-under. The Browns' defense isn't really something to be too scared of. I don't think they're the worst defense in the world. I still have nightmares of what they did week 1, but I think they'll be okay. And Zeke's obviously one of the most talented running backs in the league here, if you look at his numbers so far this season. 19 rushing attempts per game, only 73 rushing yards per game, only 3.8 yards per carry, which isn't great, but the volume's going to be there. He's getting involved in the passing game quite a bit. Nearly 6.5 targets per game, 5 catches per game as well, with a 16% target share. The Browns are 10th DVA versus the run, only allowing 20.6 DraftKings points per game to the position, 62 rushing yards per game as well. But Zeke, obviously the volume's there, and volume's pretty much the most important thing in DFS for the most part. Sometimes you just got to put aside matchups. And it's still only a 3-week sample size, so I think Zeke will be totally fine here. Like the volume, and it's going to be a lot of points scored here from the Cowboys. And then Dalvin Cook at 7,600. I feel like he's more of the GPP option here. I think a lot of people in cash games will probably try to fit in Alvin Kamara or Ezekiel Elliott. But Dalvin Cook's coming off a really good game, and this is a 54.5 point over under here. They are slight dogs, but we know he's going to be involved in the passing game a little bit as well. Now this season only 2.5 targets per game, but he's still a capable pass catcher. But he's been doing fine on the ground. Nearly 100 rushing yards per game, 16 rushing attempts per game, about 1.5 touchdowns per game, and a 6.10 yards per carry, which is very, very good. And this is a pretty good matchup on the ground as well for Dalvin Cook, as the Texans are 24th DVA versus the run, 31 DraftKings points allowed per game, and nearly 170 rushing yards allowed per game as well. So Dalvin Cook, I think he's fine. I prefer Kamara and Ezekiel Elliott over him, but Cook's a fine tournament pivot off of those guys as of right now. James Robinson at 6,500. Does he seem a bit pricey? Sure, but he's been playing pretty well, and he had a massive, massive game on Thursday Night Football versus the Miami Dolphins. And his numbers on the season aren't that bad. He's getting volume, 14 rushing attempts per game, 70 rushing yards per game, 1 rushing touchdown per game, and nearly 5 yards per carry, which is pretty good. He's also involved in the passing game as well, with 3.5 targets per game and 43 receiving yards per game. This is a pretty good matchup versus the Bengals. They have struggled versus running backs this season. They're 21st DVA versus the run, allowing over 30 DraftKings points per game to running backs, and 155 rushing yards per game as well, and also 1.3 touchdowns per game. So Robinson, he's a fine volume play. He's not the sexiest play. It's never like a sexy play playing James Robinson at 6,500, but the matchup's there and the volume's there, and again, volume is something very important for DFS purposes. But my favorite running back on the slate is Kenyan Drake at 6,000 once you factor in the price. Like, overall, my favorite running back is going to be Alvin Kamara or Ezekiel Elliott, but once you factor in that price tag of Kenyan Drake in the matchup versus Carolina, you can sign me up all day for that. I know Kenyan Drake really hasn't had a great game yet this year, and he did kind of suck his chalk last week. Kyler Murray kind of stole a rushing touchdown, but Kenyan Drake should have a good game here versus Carolina. If he doesn't, I don't know really what to say, but the volume's going to be there. He's a talented running back. The Cardinals should be able to score quite a few points here. They have a 27.75 implied team total, and the matchup is just so good. I can't see how Kenyan Drake fails this week. If people are a little bit worried about playing Kenyan Drake, that just makes me happier because he'll be lower owned, because he should be able to smash here. I think this is the game where he could have a little bit of a breakout. They're 28th DVA versus the run, allowing nearly 45 DraftKings points per game to running backs, 115 rushing yards per game, and an insane 2.5 rushing touchdown per game as well. Also getting beat up in the pass, but definitely Kenyan Drake in this spot, only $6,000. If you can go into the week fitting in Kamara, Ezekiel Elliott, and Kenyan Drake, I'd feel pretty good about that. That's a lot of volume there. They're all in pretty good spots, and I would definitely like that. I'm not sure how easy it's going to be. I've not tried building lineups yet, obviously, but I would definitely like being able to get all three of those guys, and I won't be able to spend up for a wide receiver, more than likely, especially if you spend up at quarterback, but I think that's definitely a decent starting point so far. Joe Mixon, 5,800. He sucked this year. The volume's there, but he's averaging 54 rushing yards per game, and this Cincinnati Bengals offensive line just really isn't doing him any favors here. And overall, the numbers have been pretty poor. And I drafted Joe Mixon in my season-long league, and I gotta be honest, I'm not looking forward to owning him for the future because it doesn't look too pretty. I tried trading him for Jonathan Taylor once Marlon Mack got hurt, but the owner didn't bite on that, which I don't blame him. But I like the price point on Mixon. Now, the Jaguars were horrendous versus the run last year. This season, it's not terrible. They're 9th DVA versus the run so far, only a 27.3 DraftKings points per game to running backs. But again, we are dealing with a bit of a smaller sample size. We'll see, but they are 3-point favorites at home, 25.25 implied team total. If they can establish the run here with Joe Mixon, he should be able to pay off that $5,800 price tag pretty easily, but yeah, it's just tough trusting Mixon behind this offensive line. He just has not looked that great. He's only at 3.2 yards per carry so far, which is also pretty ugly. So we'll see on Joe Mixon. Feels a little bit more of a GBP play, but he's cheap and the volume's there, and he's talented. It's just not many lanes for him. Mike Davis, 5,700. He's been heavily involved in the passing game in 2 straight games, so he definitely piques my interest. If I just pull up his game log, I'll let you guys know the targets each game. He had 8 receptions the past 2 games total. He had 8 targets in week 2 and 9 targets in week 3. So he kind of stepped into the CMC role. It's not like he got 20 plus carries, but 13 carries and 9 targets. That's some pretty darn good volume, and he's only 5,700 here. It's a decently good matchup here versus the Arizona Cardinals. This season, they haven't really given up too much versus the run. If you look at their numbers, 13 DVOA versus the position, over 100 rushing yards per game, but only 3.3 rushing touchdowns per game and 27 points allowed. But Mike Davis, if he's going to give me around 20 opportunities and a decent amount of that being targets, because in DraftKings we get PPR scoring, so that's obviously a big boost to him as well. So I think the floor is pretty safe for Mike Davis. And David Johnson, look, I just kind of like picking on the Vikings for the most part. They're 3.5 point favorites at home, a 29 implied team total. The numbers for Johnson this season, it's not too pretty. 3.5 targets per game is fine. 11.5 rushing attempts per game, it's kind of whatever, but this is a good spot here. They're allowing nearly 1.5 rushing touchdowns per game so far, over 130 rushing yards. 30.8 DraftKings points allowed per game, and they're 23rd DVOA versus the run. So Johnson at 5,600, he's fine. This should be a pretty good game for DFS purposes. Then we'll move on to the wide receiver position with DeAndre Hopkins, who is just getting peppered with targets this season. Kind of feels like last year's Michael Thomas. But he's coming off a pretty good game last week, which he really hasn't had a bad game yet this year. But he's got a 35.9% target share, 75% weight opportunity share. Again, not getting the ball really downfield too much, but he's been totally fine. 12.5 targets per game, over 10 catches, and over 118 receiving yards. So the numbers have been very good for DeAndre Hopkins. This is also a great matchup here versus the Carolina Panthers, who are 28 DVOA versus the pass, allowing 35 DraftKings points per game to wide receivers. And really, matchups don't matter for DeAndre Hopkins. He is arguably the best wide receiver in football. I mean, Julio Jones, DeAndre Hopkins, Michael Thomas, and a couple of other guys can, it's debatable, but Devontae Adams. But, I mean, Hopkins is overall so good. And again, he's a nice pairing with Kyler Murray. But to be honest, I would rather allocate my money on the running backs this week. So I don't think I'm going to be able to get up to DeAndre Hopkins unless I'm just game stacking the Cardinals, like pairing him up with Kyler Murray. But he's a fine option nonetheless. But just given the way the slate is, it might be a little bit tough to pay $8,500 for DeAndre Hopkins. Then going down to Michael Thomas, 7,600. I really can't go too deep into here. We're not sure if he's going to play yet. I feel like he's going to try to, and if he does, I mean, the matchup's good versus Detroit. They've struggled versus the pass this season. And there wasn't a more consistent wide receiver in football last year than Michael Thomas. We saw his price tag over $9K for quite some time at the end of the year. So if he's good to go and he's fully healthy, 7,600 is a steal versus Detroit, but it's something we're going to have to monitor. So just keep that in mind as we head on later into the week. Then we got the two Seattle Seahawks wide receivers in Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf. Tyler Lockett coming off a 3-touchdown performance in the first half. I own Tyler Lockett. I had him in DFS, and I had him in season long, and I was like, are we going to get like 4, 5, 6 touchdowns from Tyler Lockett today? The way Russell Wilson was playing. Unfortunately, it stopped at 3, but he still scored you, like 40 points on DraftKings with a 100-yard bonus. I know he scored 37 in PPR, so I think that would give him 40 DraftKings points. So he went absolutely off, and look, the volume's going to be there for him, and Russell Wilson's been cooking this year, and it's a good matchup versus Miami. So, yeah, I'm going to have interest in both of these guys. I'll kind of just group them together. Tyler Lockett's going to be the safer play. Comes with a little bit of a price bump there from DK Metcalf, but, I mean, they're both fine plays. They both have upside. DK Metcalf is the home run play, while Tyler Lockett's kind of the safe, I feel pretty good about it play. Metcalf can be a little up or down, but he's been fine this season. He would have had a absolute monster game last week if he wouldn't have made that stupid decision where he kind of quit running and he got to the end zone and then the ball popped out from behind and ended up being a touchback for the Dallas Cowboys. So I'm sure a lot of you were tilted over that. I mean, I wasn't because I had Tyler Lockett, but I like DK Metcalf quite a bit. He still had a good game, though, got into the end zone, and both of these guys have been very, very good to start the season. So if you had to pick one, I'm going to start with Tyler Lockett. But the air yards for DK Metcalf, man, 17.2 ADOT, 379 air yards this season, nearly 50% market share of the team's air yards. Both are fine plays here. If I had to pick one, Tyler Lockett's a safer play, but DK Metcalf's got that home run upside. Amari Cooper, 6,700. Again, you're going to want exposure to this game, and this is a beatable matchup here versus Cleveland. I assume Denzel Ward will be seeing a lot of Amari, or I should have that backwards. I assume Amari Cooper's going to be seeing quite a bit of Denzel Ward here, who's been solid this year, but we saw Terry McLaurin have a pretty good game, and I saw quite a few times where Ward was not following Terry McLaurin, so we'll see what they do with that, but still, this is a beatable matchup here in Amari Cooper. He's been getting plenty of volume this season. He's been fine each game. Hasn't really had a blow-up game, but 11.5 targets per game, over 8 catches per game, 90 receiving yards per game, 350 air yards, so I think Amari Cooper's fine. If you're looking at the matchup overall, the Cleveland Browns are 10th DVA versus the pass, allowing 43 DraftKings points per game to wide receivers and over 1.5 receiving touchdowns per game as well. So Cooper and all the Dallas Cowboys wide receivers, I think, are certainly in play here. And we have a 55-point over-under. So points are going to be scored from somewhere. And the high-volume guys like Amari Cooper and Zeke Elliott are always the most likely candidates. Then dropping down to Adam Thielen here at 6,600. I want exposure to this game, and Vegas has the Vikings trailing, not by much. I don't really think it's going to be too pass-heavy here for the Minnesota Vikings. But Thielen, I think he's in a good spot here. Now, Justin Jefferson stole the show last week where he put up 7 catches for 175 yards on 9 targets and a touchdown where he ended up scoring 33.5 DraftKings points. Not saying you can't do that again, but I don't expect it again. And Adam Thielen should be fine here versus a pretty beatable Houston secondary. And if you're looking at Thielen's numbers this year, 7 targets per game, a 77% weighted opportunity share, nearly 50% market share of the team's air yards, an 8 out of 17.3, 363 air yards. And I think Adam Thielen should be fine here. Big wide receiver cornerback matchup advantage here according to PFF. And the Texans are 19th DVA versus the pass this season. So Thielen at 6,600, I think he's a fine play. Then Will Fuller at 5,900. I think he's a fine pairing with Deshaun Watson. And besides that awful Week 2 game where he did nothing and he got a little bit injured, Week 1, 22.2 fantasy points. Then Week 3, 15.4 fantasy points. And he's had 3 really tough matchups so far. He's played KC, who's allowing the least points per game to wide receivers, I believe, right now. Baltimore, obviously a great secondary. And then Pittsburgh, another good defense. But it gets a lot softer here versus Minnesota, one of the worst defenses in the league. Wide receivers have done pretty well versus them this season. And if you're looking at their numbers overall, they're 13th DVA versus the pass by allowing nearly 50 DraftKings points per game to wide receivers, over 200 receiving yards per game, and over 1.5 receiving touchdowns per game as well. So Fuller, he's a nice option with Deshaun Watson. And Odell at 5,800. I don't really like playing Odell for DFS, but this might be an Odell week. Dallas is a team that has struggled versus wide receivers so far this year and versus the pass. And we have a 55-point over-under here. So it feels pretty interesting to me. It feels a little bit risky, but the targets are there for him, and he looks good on the field at times. I mean, sometimes, a little bit of mistakes, but and some of that can be on Baker as well. But, I mean, they're 4.5-point dog share. They're going to be throwing the ball quite a bit. This is a good spot for Odell. He's getting 7.5 targets per game so far, only catching 3.5 of them. But, again, some of these throws are a bit inaccurate from Baker Mayfield, and I mean, he's doing his best out there. But Odell's got a 28% target share in the year, 73% weighted opportunity share, 43% market share of the team's air yards, and 8 out of 14.2. I like Odell here. It's a good matchup versus Dallas. They've struggled this season. 24th DVA versus the pass. Like I said, allowing over 50 DraftKings points per game to wide receivers, over 200 receiving yards, and 2.5 receiving touchdowns per game nearly as well. So, good spot for Odell here. And I like that buy low spot at 5,800. Although, I don't know if it's a buy low spot technically, because he was cheaper than 5,800 in Week 2, but last week he was 6,300, so his price they're good in a little bit, so I guess technically you are buying low. But I like the spot for Odell, and I think he can pay off that 5,800 price tag, especially if the Browns are playing from behind. Devontae Parker, 5,700. These are our 2 pairings with our cheap quarterbacks. You can pair Odell with Baker Mayfield, and you can pair Devontae Parker with Ryan Fitzpatrick, because these guys are just a bit too cheap here, and there's some pretty good matchups. And when I show you these guys' numbers of how bad Seattle has been versus the wide receiver position, it's almost hard to believe. I had to double check this, but it's correct. They're allowing 80 DraftKings points per game so far to the wide receiver position. They have been getting absolutely smoked, and nearly 400 receiving yards per game as well. So I think Parker can have a solid game here. We knew how on fire Devontae Parker and Ryan Fitzpatrick were at the end of the season. This year's only got a 17% target share, 8 out of 10.4, but I think there's better times ahead here for Devontae Parker, and I like that price point. I like the matchup as well. DJ Moore, 5,600. I think he's just a bit too cheap here. He's getting over 8.5 targets per game. He had a down week last week, but look, he's got a 49% market share of the team's air yards, 350 air yards this season, and 8 out of 13.5. He's just too cheap here. It's a beatable matchup versus Arizona, so I think you're getting a nice buy low spot in DJ Moore. CeeDee Lamb, 5,400. His price did not move from last week. And if you think Denzel Ward's going to be following Amari Cooper on the field, I think that's going to open up more opportunities for CeeDee Lamb. This is a pretty beatable Browns secondary. We saw Terry McLaurin have a fine game last week. And, I mean, CeeDee Lamb's been fine this year. 7 targets per game, 5.5 receptions per game, 76 receiving yards. Not a huge portion of the target share at only 15%, but the guy is talented, and 5,400. I want exposure to this game, so I think he's a fine option. Then N'Keal Harry at 4,000. He's just pretty much a price play for the most part. The Patriots are 7-point dogs here on the road in KC. So if they have to throw the ball a little bit, I think Harry can get the job done at only $4,000. He's been getting about 7 targets per game this season, 5 catches per game, only 48 receiving yards. But look, if he can get us 5 catches for 50 yards, we're going to take that at 4,000 because it's going to allow us to fit in guys like Zeke, like Kamara, like Kenyan Drake, and maybe a spend-up quarterback as well. So don't mind N'Keal Harry at only $4,000. We'll move on to the tight end position, which I think's pretty weak this week for the most part. Wasn't a lot of guys that stood out to me. I feel like I'm just going to end up playing Logan Thomas again and just moving on with my life just because it's just, I don't know. I don't really love any of the tight ends. Darren Waller's fine, 5,200 just from a volume standpoint. Didn't do anything really last week, but we know the guy's got upside. He's getting 9 targets per game this season, 6.5 catches per game. He's got a 62% weighted opportunity share with a 30% target share. Yeah, those are some pretty good numbers. The matchup here versus the Buffalo Bills. They're 15th DVA versus the pass, allowing 17.8 Draftkings points per game to tight ends and over 80 receiving yards per game. So this isn't a bad spot for Darren Waller. A little bit tougher outside. So down the middle, they're going to be a little bit softer. And I think Waller's fine. Mike Gesicki here at 5,100. He's having a decent season so far. I think he only had 1 catch last week on 3 targets. It was in the end zone, so good enough, right? But I don't know. I mean, 5,100 seems a bit much for him, but 20% target share in the season. He's getting the ball down the field. He's got an 8 out of 11.6. and 220 air yards and a 30% market share of the team's air yards, which is pretty darn good, and 60 receiving yards per game. And look, this is a good matchup here versus Seattle. I like this game quite a bit, so I think he's fine as a run back option. If you want to stack Seattle, you can run it back with Parker and Gesicki. And then just some cheaper options here in Dalton Schultz and Logan Thomas. Schultz, he's fine. I want exposure to this game. The Browns have not been good versus tight ends so far this year. They didn't really give up too much to Logan Thomas, but even then, I think he had around 8 points, which is fine for his price point. But they're giving up nearly 20 DraftKings points per game to tight ends, 60 receiving yards per game, and a receiving touchdown per game as well. So I think Schultz is fine, and the Cowboys have a team total of nearly 30 this week. Then Logan Thomas, I feel like he's kind of just your obvious cheap option. He hasn't been like anything too crazy, but the volume's there, and that's really all we can ask for at 3,500. He's getting 8 targets per game so far. He's got a 24% target share, 54% weight opportunity share. I think he's 3rd in tight end targets this season, only behind Travis Kelce and Darren Waller, which is pretty good as well. And not huge in the yardage department, but I think he's a fine option here. The matchup versus the the Baltimore Ravens isn't too bad for a tight end. They got a good secondary, but versus tight ends, they've been a little bit soft, allowing 80 receiving yards per game, over half a touchdown per game, and nearly 20 DraftKings points per game as well, and they're 22nd DVA versus the pass. So Logan Thomas at 3,500, that's really not that bad of a spot for him. And then as for the defenses, I mean, just pick whatever fits at the end. I threw a couple of these on here just ones that have low team totals against. 17 points against the Ravens, 17 points against the Rams, and only 18 points versus the Buccaneers. And the football team, I just threw them on here because they're free. I don't think they're going to have a good game versus the Baltimore Ravens. They have a team total of nearly 30 against them, but they're free. All you need is a couple of sacks and maybe a turnover or two, and maybe if Lamar Jackson plays like he did last week, hey, at 2,100, that's not going to be too bad. But that's going to be it for this video, guys. I hope it was helpful. If it was, make sure you leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, consider hitting that subscribe button. It really helps me out. I really do appreciate that. We're going to getting close to 7K subs. I was at 6K, I think, last week. Now we're up to nearly 6,300, which is awesome. So once we get to 7K, it's awesome. I do appreciate each and every single one of you guys. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.